The 1920s period, historically known as the Roaring Twenties. The United States had emerged strengthened from the First World War, intoxicated by a fervor for technology and consumerism. Everyone believed they had found the easy path to wealth, thanks to electric appliances, new cars, and most importantly, the rapid rise in the stock market. But beneath this excitement lay a giant economic bubble about to burst. When history reached 1929, the most devastating economic crisis in world history would begin. The Great Depression. A crisis so deep and long-lasting cannot have just one cause. The Depression was triggered by a combination of several critical factors. Firstly, there was the problem of overproduction and insufficient demand. American industry grew at a tremendous pace in the 1920s. Factories were producing goods faster than the public's purchasing power could absorb them. While production was at its peak, workers' wages remained stagnant. The markets were flooded with goods, but consumer demand was inadequate. This situation had begun to weaken corporate profits. The second critical factor was uncontrolled speculation and easy credit. People viewed the stock market as a quick route to riches. Stocks were inflated far beyond their true value, exceeding future potential earnings. Even worse, investors were buying stocks by paying only a 10% down payment, that is, on margin, with credit. This leveraged system multiplied profits when prices rose, but it would also multiply the losses when prices fell. Furthermore, financial regulations were almost non-existent. Finally, the weak banking system posed a major risk. There were thousands of small banks in the U.S., and these banks' deposits were not insured. A single bank failure meant the total loss of the savings of all people in that region. When the crisis hit, a chain reaction of bank failures was inevitable. All this tension erupted on Thursday, October 24, 1929. On that day, known as Black Thursday, panic-stricken investors began selling off their shares. The value of stocks rapidly retreated throughout the day. The collapse could not be stopped. A few days later, when Black Tuesday, October 29th, arrived, the stock market suffered one of the greatest losses in history again. When the market crashed, those who had bought stocks on credit could not repay their debts. This hit the banks that had issued the loans. Millions of people rushed to withdraw their savings from banks, which triggered mass bank failures. People's savings instantly evaporated, consumption halted, and businesses began to close. The financial crisis rapidly turned into a social catastrophe. Since millions of factories and businesses closed, the unemployment rate in the U.S. soared to 25%. 1 out of every 4 workers was unemployed. Families who lost their jobs could not pay their rent. Farmers who could not pay their debts lost their lands to the banks. In the cities, shanty towns built from tin and wood out of desperation, named Hooverville, in reference to the then President Herbert Hoover, were established. To this devastation, a natural disaster was added. Severe drought and poor farming practices in the Midwestern U.S. states led to enormous dust storms, known as the Dust Bowl disaster. Farmers were left without land, and thousands of families were forced to migrate to California in search of a better life. The crisis was not just America's problem. After World War I, U.S. banks had given large amounts of credit to European countries. When the U.S. economy collapsed, these credits were quickly recalled. Global trade virtually ceased. The U.S., in an effort to protect its own farmers, imposed very high tariffs on imported goods with the Smoot-Hawley Act. Other countries retaliated in kind. These trade wars reduced the volume of world trade by 60%, deepening the crisis and turning economic problems into global political instability. The crisis reached a turning point with the election of Franklin D. Roosevelt as U.S. President in 1932. Roosevelt launched a series of programs that fundamentally changed economic philosophy. The New Deal. The core idea of the New Deal was government intervention in the economy. To restore confidence in banks, deposits were federally insured, FDIC. Large infrastructure projects were launched through agencies like the Public Works Administration, PWA. Dams were built, roads were constructed, and millions of jobs were created for the unemployed. Furthermore, for the first time in history, a Social Security Act was established for the elderly and unemployed. Although the New Deal did not end the crisis immediately, it stabilized the economy and gave hope to the public. However, according to experts, the event that truly ended the Great Depression was, unfortunately, the massive military spending triggered by World War II. The Great Depression fundamentally shook the belief in the ability of capitalism and the free market to self-regulate. It taught us a lesson. Uncontrolled speculation, weak financial regulation, and global trade wars can drag the entire world into disaster. Even today, central banking, social security systems, and financial regulations are built upon the lessons learned from those terrible days in 1929. The Great Depression remains the most striking and painful example of human psychology and systemic risks throughout economic history.